So, good morning, everyone. We are continuing our studies from yesterday. We are learning Derech Mitzvosecha, the ways of your commandments, book authored by the Tzemach Tzedek, third Chabad Rebbe, and we are holding in section 2. We had a long day yesterday. Before we start going into section 2, deeper, do you guys have any questions from yesterday? Something we need to more clarify? Or everything is clear? When there's no questions, either everything is clear or everything is unclear. So, I hope it's the first one. Okay, so today, yesterday we finished off by speaking about the two levels of godliness, which is a very general theme in the Hasidic philosophy. And its sources are from the Kabbalah, obviously, as most topics actually in Hasidic philosophy are not new themes, but themes that appear in Kabbalistic writings. But Hasidus and Hasidic philosophy elaborates them better and more in length. So these two levels of godliness that we spoke about yesterday is what it's called Memale Kol Almin and Sovev Kol Almin. Memale Kol Almin is the godliness which fills the worlds, and Sovev Kol Almin is the godliness which surrounds the worlds. It's a very important theme that reappears constantly in Hasidic teachings, and we explained it a bit yesterday that it obviously doesn't mean in a physical sense that God surrounds the worlds or God fills the worlds. It means it more relates to the type of revelation we are able to comprehend from God. So whatever we comprehend from God, it all comes from the relationship of God and us, and that relationship is through Him being a creator, Him being the creator which constantly keeps an eye on its creation and is the God of that acts upon history. So all the things that we understand of Him is only things the way He relates to us. But we say that this is not the essence of God, and the essence of God is uncomprehendable and not something we can understand. So we call it something which doesn't fill us, doesn't come into us. It's something that surrounds us. What does it mean that it surrounds us? So we gave an example of a student and a master, where the master needs to simplify his message, his teachings, from the way they are in his head to the simpler level of the student. And so he's going to make a lot of he's going to cut all the edges and all the depth, and he's going to say it in simpler words. So that is something that is comprehensive for the student. He will take it in. It will be something that will become an inner knowledge for him. But deeper knowledge of the master won't go into his head, won't be graspable and won't be comprehensive and won't be felt in an intellectual way for the student. At the same time, the student will feel that there is something that hollows over him. He will feel that there is more to this than what is said here. He will feel that there is something that is still not clear, or something that is higher than his understanding. He will feel that this teacher and master knows more than what he just said, and there's more to this idea than what was said. And that's why we call it that's something that surrounds us. Because something that surrounds us, we also feel it, but we don't comprehend it. And that's what it means, the godliness that surrounds us, which means we could understand the type of godliness that is in relation to us, and that is the godliness which fills the world. We cannot understand the godliness which is the essence of God, or the essence of God, but we feel it's there. We know we can even say we know it's there, we just don't know what it is. And this is an important distinction between, we also wrote it yesterday, the difference between Yediat HaMetziut v'Havanat HaMahut. the knowledge of existence or the understanding of the essence. So, and this is something we're going to go into more in depth today when we will read the section 2. He will explain this in depth, and we can say that today we will speak about, in general, if this idea of can we understand God? Because yesterday we more focused on can we understand that there is a God? Can we come to the conclusion in a cognitive way that there is a God? That was yesterday's one of the main topics. Today we will speak more about what can we understand of God? What is the level of godliness that can be comprehended?
Maybe when you speak, maybe you need some water here.
You're very kind. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, so let's go to section 2, and we'll start reading a little bit. So it says like this. It is, however, necessary to understand. Seemingly, there is a contradiction to our statement that God's existence and the fact that He endows the world with life is not in the realm of faith, but instead is something that can actually be known. From the well-known teaching of the Zohar, no thought can grasp Him at all, which implies that created beings cannot grasp God with their knowledge and comprehension at all. So this is a seeming contradiction, right? This is a typical way of Jewish thought in general, not just Hasidic philosophy. It's like a Talmudic way of bringing up a topic. You bring a contradiction. That contradiction can be a logical contradiction, or it can be a contradiction of sources. So right now we are more based on sources, less on logic. So on one hand, we said more logically yesterday that we could understand God, and we didn't clarify what that means. On the other hand, we have sources to say that God is incomprehensible. What are our sources? So these two, or actually not two. One very often quoted quote from the Zohar. Yesterday we mentioned the Zohar as one of the most important Kabbalistic writings of Kabbalah. And the Zohar says, Leis machshava, Leis machshava, Tfisa, Bey. This is a really often quoted sentence from the Zohar. What does it mean? It's a sentence in Aramaic. There is no thought that can grasp it. Actually, the word tfisa is just like in Hebrew, tofes. It's something that similarly to English or to Hungarian is the word of catching or grasping in English also means physically to grasp something. Or in Hungarian, when we say megfogni, but felfogni, it's almost the same word. It's the type of understanding when you understand something in a way that you actually have it from all around. It's something that you caught on, something which becomes yours intellectually, obviously. It's something that then later gets built into your way of thinking. So when we speak about God, the Zohar says, you cannot grasp Him. You cannot understand Him. So then, how does it make sense when we just said before that to know that there is a God is not a question of faith because you can get to that conclusion intellectually. So how do you solve this contradiction? So actually, we solved this contradiction yesterday. What did we say? Depends what we talk about. There is a type of understanding when we understand that there is a God, and there's a type of understanding that we understand what God is. So when we speak about understanding that there is a God is something that's possible. When we speak about understanding what God is, at least on the level of Sovev Kolamin, at least on the level of the essence of God, is not something which is possible. But let's read this inside now. I'm sorry. In truth, however, there is no contradiction at all. The last sentence on page 1 of section 2. And everything can be reconciled. How? On the basis of the statement of the Rambam that the existence of the Creator is known, but the inner nature of his being is not known. So the metzius, is something that we can grasp, but the mahus, the essence, is not graspable. The concept is accepted by all texts of true knowledge. Right? The true knowledge refers to holy texts. The intent is that as a result of his acts, we know that he exists. But we don't know how and what the nature of his being is. So we know he exists, but we don't know how he exists. Concerning this, it is written, can an understanding of God be reached? So it's also very typical for Hasidus, and this is something we spoke about yesterday, that Hasidus is a mystical philosophy, right? And we said, what does that mean, mystical philosophy? It's a seemingly contradicting title, because philosophy is all based on human contemplation. Mysticism is based on some type of tradition or some type of revelation, and not on contemplation. So Hasidus is unique because it brings the two together. So it is also philosophical in the way that it's material that is understandable, and at the same time it's always bases itself on some type of holy script, some type of revelation. And that's why it's very typical that when the Hasidic philosophy will explain something in very intellectual and understandable ways, it will also try to find different sources from the script, from the Tanakh, in order to base itself on something. It's not just, we have this, we're just saying it. No, there's a tradition that we're basing it on. So Eov is a very interesting Job, I think you say it in English, right? So the book of Job is actually a very, very important book when it comes to Jewish philosophy. If you guys haven't read it, I really recommend you to read it. It's a book that, according to many, is actually the first book of Jewish philosophy, because it's one of the first texts that deals with major philosophical question. And that major philosophical question of Job is, why do the righteous suffer? And why do the wicked sometimes get off the hook and they don't suffer and they have a good life? But this is the major theme of Job. And there's many other themes that obviously are brought up in the text. And one of the things that Job says, Job is in itself is a very interesting character. Somebody that says his ideas many times in a way of a dilemma. He's questioning things. So many times it's not a statement, but a question. And that's also pretty philosophical, right? It's something that philosophers do all the time. So many themes that are major themes in Jewish philosophy are stated in the book of Job, but they are stated in a way of a question. And what is this question here? Can an understanding of God be reached? It is a question, but it's a statement in a way of a question. No, God cannot be understood. It's not an understandable thing. So on one hand we say this, that God is not understandable. The same way the Zohar says that God cannot be grasped through any thought. On the other hand, we said that God is understandable. So how do we...
Who said that we can understand?
That we can understand?
The Zohar said that...
The Zohar said we cannot understand. And the quote is behind me. Job said, in a way of a question, that you cannot understand. At the same time, in the section earlier, we explained that you could understand that there is a God, and it's not a question of faith. You can understand that there is a God. So what is the solution to this problem? So there is an analogy that we gave also yesterday, and he's going to go back to this analogy. A person knows and feels that he has a living soul from the fact that he sees that his body is flesh and blood is alive. This is, however, this, however, is also merely the knowledge of its existence. We spoke about this metaphor yesterday. You turned the page. It is clearly known to him that his soul exists within his body, but he does not know the how and what of the nature and the essence of his soul. Moreover, he doesn't even know the nature of the soul's enclothement in his body, even though he clearly knows that the soul encloses itself in all the 248 limbs of his body. So basically the metaphor is clear. We spoke about this yesterday. We're going to continue just because there's some interesting things here that he says about the connection, the relationship between body and soul. But basically, he's saying that you want to have a clear example of what it means, which we mentioned, which we wrote down yesterday, the knowledge of existence and understanding of essence. So let me give you an example. Soul and body. We all know we have a soul. That's unquestionable, right? Actually, in the times of Tzemach Tzedek, nobody would have dared to question that. Nobody would have dared to say, and it's actually an interesting discussion, that life is just a chemical process, or biological or chemical process. It is clear that there is a soul. There is more to material than just material, right? Why? Because of the effects of that thing, which we call life. You see the thing moving. But moving, and we'll get to it in a second, we'll dwell a little bit more into what Hasidus says about life and material. But, so it's clear that we know that there is a soul. I think there's a saying by the Tzemach Tzedek in another place, if someone doesn't understand that he has a soul, it's just like if someone wouldn't understand the difference between a live chicken and a bowl of chicken soup. Right? It's the same material, it's the same chemicals, and you just look at it and you see clearly there is a difference. Does that mean I know how to define what that soul is? No, I don't know how to define what that soul is. And not only I don't know how to define what that soul is, I don't even know how to define the way this soul encloses itself in the body. This expression of enclosing itself in the body comes from the idea that, which is also very frequently related to in Hasidus, that the relationship between a body and a soul is very similar to a relationship between a body and a cloth. Cloth? That's the word, right? Bigud, ruhak, cloth. So, Hasidus does make many specific differentiation between the two relationships. So, for example, one of the major differences is that as far as it comes to a body and a shirt, you can always pinpoint and say, this is the shirt, this is the body. Which is not true with the body and the soul. When you have a live person, every single piece of him is a part of a live person. You cannot pinpoint and say, this is just the body or this is just the soul, right? But at the same time, there is a very strong similarity. The fact that for example, clothes is a way of an expression, right? Same is true regarding a body, is an expression of the soul. Clothes are made, tailor-made. So the clothes fits your body. Your body fits your soul. You have a body which is exactly made for your soul. So on and so forth. So there's many similarities, and we use this expression of the body enclosing itself and the soul enclosing itself into the body. And we don't even, not only we don't know what the soul is, we don't even understand exactly or know exactly in what way does the soul and for what in what stimulus does the soul encloses itself in the body. Jó reggelt kívánok! Köszönjük szépen! Az asztalra köszönjük! Köszönjük szépen!
Én köszönöm,
viszontlátásra! So we have a very good example of this relationship or this differentiation between knowing the existence and understanding the essence. We know the existence of a soul. We don't know the essence of what and how. We know it is, but we don't know what and how. Same is true for godliness. Now, I just want to stop here for a second because this is a very important theme in Hasidus in general. So it's the idea of body and soul and godliness in the world. I mentioned this yesterday that there's this general idea in Hasidus that if you want to understand godliness, you have to first understand your soul. And because your soul, this is for many reasons, but for example, because God created humans on his own image, which means the same way our relationship with our bodies and the outside world is in a certain relationship between godliness and the creatures and the creation. Why is that so? Because God wanted to give us a way to have an intellectual relationship with him. And he created us in a way that if we will understand ourselves better, we will be able to understand him better as well. So actually our existence is a metaphor of his existence. Not his essential existence, but at least the existence on the level of him relating to us. This is a very interesting phenomenon. Actually, just on a side note, there is a philosopher, I forgot his name, I'm sorry, a French Jewish philosopher, his name is David, I forgot his last name, that I listened to some of his lectures, and he mentions this not on the same note, but he says, it's not only interesting when we speak about the existence, how it's so logical, right? We understand nature and we are always amazed about how logically the nature works, how everything copes together. But even more interesting, that we are able to understand this nature. Because it could have been that there is a nature which is very logical, but our brains are not fit to understand the logic of nature. So we are in Hasidus take this to another level. It's not only that it's beautiful that we are able to understand this very unique and logical nature. Once we understand its nature, this gives us the capability to understand godliness as well. So therefore, the idea of bringing metaphors and trying to understand better the way our soul works and the way our soul relates to our body is a very, very typical Hasidic way of speaking about or trying us to understand godliness. And so here again, you have some, there are certain ideas that appear in Talmudic literature that are, that if you just read the Talmud, it doesn't seem that relevant. And Hasidus takes one sentence or just one short quote out of the Talmud and builds a whole huge philosophical basis on it. So, just to give you one thing, which is a typical example of this, we'll maybe speak about it later in length. When it comes to the reason of creation, why did God create the world? So there is a midrash which says many things, and it also says just one sentence. God created the world because he wanted a home for himself. And if you read it just from the midrash, you would say, it's a cute quote. He was homeless and he wanted a home. But Hasidus, I could say like 30% of Hasidic teachings is based on this line, one-liner. And it's important because, again, Hasidus always emphasizes, I'm not bringing anything new to you. Everything I'm saying, you will find sources for it in ancient literature. Because it's important that, this is, I think, also relates to the historic fact that we spoke about, and I heard you had also in the break a little discussion about, that when Hasidic movement was born in Europe, there was a lot of antagonism against it. And there was a whole movement against Hasidus, the Litvish movement, the Misnagdim. And this movement and this fight became most vicious probably around the time of the first Chabad Rebbe, and the first Chabad Rebbe himself was in the target of the other group. So much so that this is the reason why the first Chabad Rebbe was taken to the jail of the Tsar and was only released after 53 days. But also in the times of the Tzemach Tzedek, this was a very, very, very vicious fight in between the two groups. Now, what was the claim of the other group, of the Misnagdim? That Chassidus is heresy. Is that the word? Epicurus? Heresy. And Chassidus is not based on tradition. It's something that it has nothing to do with the traditions. And therefore it is always important that Chassidus always bases itself on ideas that are rooted in traditional texts. You will never find Chassidus quoting, almost never find actually, it's interesting. It's an interesting thing in itself, because if you, for example, read Middle Ages Jewish history, you read history of Maimonides, Nachmanides, Abarbanel, everything. You have a crazy amount of Greek philosophy quoted in it, and basically accepting it as like unquestionable truth. And you will not only have these ideas, they will many times say, and this is what this and this guy says, or this is the idea of Greek philosophy. Many times they will question it or they will argue with it, but they deal with it as it's like on their level, In Chassidus, you will hardly find any quote from an outside source, not a Torah source. It's very rarely they will say, philosophers say so and so, and 90% of the time when it is quoted, it's only quoted to then be argued upon. So, and I have no doubts that this is because, as a Chassid myself, obviously I believe that it's because it's based on a more pure and holy source, but also I think because the fight against Hasidism was that it's not pure and it's not traditional, and this is a way to build a framework and show that no, this is all based on it's not just contemplation, it's not just things that make sense, but it's all based on holy sources. So one of the why was I saying this? Because when we started speaking about the 613 commandments, and we said that one of these 613 might be the faith in God, and we had a discussion about who listed the 613 and what was this all about. So we explained that it comes from the Talmud, the source of the 613, and the first one to list it was the Bahag, which we mentioned also yesterday. He's the one that didn't include the faith of God into the 613. But there is another distinction. When we speak about the 613 mitzvot, the 613 commandments, there is another distinction that is probably stated in the Talmud. I'm almost sure. Is that what is the 613 made up of? 365 negative commandments and 248 positive commandments. Right? We spoke yesterday about what the meaning is of negative and positive. It means, do I have to refrain from something? That's the refrain is the word?
Prohibition.
To not to do something. That's the 365. And 248 is the positive commandment that I have to act, when I have to do something. So, obviously these numbers have also a symbolic meaning. And what is the symbolic meaning? That 365 is the days of a solar year. So you have to refrain from all these things 365 days of a year. They commend you all the time. 248, so the Talmud says this is the number of limbs of a body, of a human body. It is also said, by the way, that this is the number of limbs, and 365 is the number of ways. whatever that means. Veins?
Oh, veins, yeah.
Veins. It's not really clear what that veins mean, but let's focus on the 248 limbs. So this is an expression. So what is the idea behind this? Is that you have to do these mitzvot, you have to do these commandments, and you have to do them with all your body, right? With your 248 limbs. So it's an expression that Chassidus always uses. When he speaks about the body as a whole, he will say Ramach Evorim, the 248 limbs. He will not just say the body, he will say the whole body. He will use this expression of 248 limbs. Now, what are we talking? This is just a little background about the language of what we're dealing with. But let's speak now about the specifics, what it says here. So the Chassidus has a very interesting way of explaining how does the soul dwell in the body? Where is the soul? What is the soul actually? So what is the soul? And this is a whole, obviously, major theme on itself. We speak about the idea of a soul in this minor, in this discourse. It's not the main topic, obviously. It's just mentioned here on a side note, but we promised we're going to try to touch upon as many topics as possible. So we're going to now speak a little bit about the soul and the body. But for example, the Tanya, the first part of the Tanya, which is, we mentioned yesterday, which is the major work. We said it's the Bible of Chabad Hasidism. So the first 53 chapters deal precisely with the idea of the soul. What is the soul of a person? So it's a very complicated topic and has many sub-themes to it. But in general, besides the general idea of saying that really soul doesn't necessarily only mean life. So even inanimate things can have a soul in a certain sense. And this is rooted also, you find these ideas also in Greek philosophy, that just the fact, and Chassidus mentions this many times, that in the simple level, soul means the higher meaning. So there is the form and the material. And the material is just the lower part of the thing, and the form is the thing that gives or resembles the purpose of the thing. So let's say a chair or a table, its body, it's wood, its soul is the fact that it's something that can be used to put things upon it. So that's the idea of body and soul on a simple level. But then now, we're not going to speak about soul in this sense. We're going to speak about soul in the sense of life. And where does this life come from? So it's obviously something higher than material, right? You have material and you have live material. What is the difference between material and live material? How would you define life? Let me ask you guys, how would you define life? What is life?
Something that is moving.
Well,
it's a beginning and an end. Let's say.
So,
if you speak about, the creatures who live in the universe, bodies are. There is this beginning and end.
right,
Material is decomposing. There is a process.
right.
I don't know. The soul is different people with different.
Personalities?
Yeah, I believe that this is some kind of energy or something. It doesn't. It goes back to the source. But
That's already faith stuff.
Yeah,
right. Yeah, but if you just look from the outside perspective, how do you define life?
It's something that moves when it wants to.
Will. So it's a question of will.
Yeah.
Right. Anything else? So you guys, both of you said moving. Actually moving could also mean many things, right? Because moving can mean moving, Moving can also mean, like, for example, a tree is also alive. It doesn't move from its place, but it moves in its place, so it develops. So Hasidus defines this in a way of life is the thing in which the material can overcome its limitations, right? Because what happens? You have a piece of material, and you see that, and this piece of material can be defined by its very specific limitations, and life is the thing which somehow changes this material, changes it from the inside by some untangible inside force. And the more it's capable of overcoming the limitations of its material, the more life there is. So therefore we can categorize living creatures into three major groups. You have Neveniak, how do you say that? Plants. You have animals, and you have humans. Now, what is the difference between these three? Is the level of how much can you overcome your limitations. When you speak about plants, they cannot overcome vegetation. I'm sorry, that's the right. I was looking for that. So vegetation or vegetations? Vegetation. So vegetation can overcome its limits, but only in the boundaries of where it is. It cannot move, but it grows. Animals can overcome their vegetation, their bodies, their material, even in the question of moving. So a dog can move from one place to another place. Humans have a unique capability of overcoming not only the physical aspect of their material, but even the spiritual aspect of the material. What does that mean? It means that when it comes to animals, they are limited to their nature. So nature is the set of rules, somewhat spiritual rules of the material. And humans can overcome their nature. So if I was born with a certain nature, I can resist that nature. So that's a question of freedom, really. Life is really freedom, freeing ourselves from material. Because a tree cannot free itself from material in the place it is. It can free itself from its materialistic boundaries, for example, on its size, or so on and so forth. Animals can free themselves from physical limitations of place. And humans can free themselves even from the physical limitations of the spiritual parts of their physical limitations, which is their nature. This is what makes humans unique in the perspective of Hasidus in comparison to other creatures. So the question is then, and actually, it's like, if you look at a living thing, you do sense the fact that there is something more to this than just the material. Because the fact that it's moving, it's like the material something in the material trying to being unhappy with the material, right? What is moving? Moving is being unhappy where I am, and trying to change the way I am, trying to change where I am, trying to change what I am, where I am. So there is something, you say, there has to be some force. There is a force that is trying to overcome this limitation. So that force cannot come from the limitation itself, right? The same way a person cannot free himself from drowning, you cannot pick yourself up by your own hair and pull yourself out of the water. You need an outside force to pull you out of water. The same way, material itself cannot create a force which would try to overcome material. You understand the definition? And therefore, this source of this life is not just a chemical process. It's not so what do materialistic people say? They say, well, all these things of life and spiritual characteristics like emotions and all that, and will and wish and all this stuff, it's all baloney. It's just chemical process. So we see that there is a chemical process. We see when you're upset, your blood pressure goes up, right? So you see that there's a chemical process. Now, what's wrong with this assumption is that, I'll give you an example. So if you're upset, your face becomes red, right? So there's a chemical process. Your blood pressure went up, your face became red. If I now start rubbing your face and your face becomes red, does that mean that you became upset? No. Although the similar chemical process came through, it doesn't mean that, so it's a question of cause and effect. So the chemical process can be an effect of this spiritual force, but it's not the spiritual force. So, and this doesn't mean that the chemical process cannot affect your spiritual part. So for example, if you take certain hormones, they can affect the way you feel. And the way you live, or if you're hungry, it's going to affect also your state of mind. And this is because soul and body, and we're going to get to this in a second, really unite in a very unique way. But we cannot accept the idea that life is just a chemical process, because it doesn't make sense. And it's not so, and it doesn't make sense because, again, for the material to overcome its limitations cannot come from the material itself. So then, but we don't know what it is, and we don't know how it is. All we see, it has an effect. So we see there is something here, because we see the moving, the idea of change, and not only moving in the physical sense, but also moving in the, good morning, also moving in the spiritual sense. We see it's moving, but we don't know what it is. We know it is, but we don't know what it is. So Chassidus goes on and says, okay, so then what is this? What is this life? Or how can you define that one thing that is the ultimate source of this idea, of this energy of trying to overcome limitations? So when you look at a person, for example, what resembles most his soul? His emotions, his intellect. Who is your soul? So what would you guys say? Like, what's the most essential part of you which you can say, well, this is the soul? This is not, I wouldn't say this is the soul. This is the level where you can most define as the soul. What would you say? What?
Voice.
Voice?
Yeah.
Why voice?
Because you express yourself with your voice.
So what about people that don't have a voice?
There is absolutely.
So, by the way, I'm sorry, just before you, so you have a good point. So try to think of that thing, which if you don't have, you stop living. So what do you want to say?
There is certainly body language, because we are.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you don't need.
All the senses.
Yeah, and when you're born, you become alive. You don't speak, and speaking is a very unique, actually, a very human. It's a good point, and it's a question itself in Chassidus why. You know that in general, in Talmudic and Middle Age sources, humans are not called humans; they are called speakers, and this actually comes probably from Aristotle. But it's a whole question itself. Why did we take that aspect of humans speaking when we could have taken a lot of other aspects? But that's a whole question to itself. But what is that thing of you which if you wouldn't have, you're not live. You don't have a soul. What do you want to say?
Well, the traditional answer is breath.
But that's a physical aspect. So you're saying, and it's true, you're saying if you stop breathing, the chemical process of the chemical context or the chemical framework in which you can be alive stops.
I mean, but even in Tanakh, right? The thing that brings Adam Marisha to life is Hashem breathe.
100%. 100%, yes. But again, you're speaking about a physical resemblance of life. Like what you're saying, this is the most basic sign of living, which is breathing and actually your heart pumping. Those two things go together, right? If you breathe, then your heart pumps. When your heart pumps, you breathe. And just 1 second. So that's just 1 second. So you have, that is the physical resemblance of life. But I'm saying on the spiritual side, can you say this is that spiritual aspect of my existence, which is the most basic. This is which from the second I'm born till the second I die, I have. If I don't have it, I'm practically not alive. Wanted to say something?
I would say the act of us, because it's
Acting?
just everything. That what is our decision and how can.
What about a person? Let me ask you
How
something.
we can I mean, let me finish.
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry.
That when you have these doubts with your Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov,
Right.
and you can show to the world how you act, if you can
Right.
stop your
Right. I'm listening.
stop your mouth before you say like Lashon Hara, or
Right.
you act like you love somebody, or you make charity. Everything through your acts, you can see the soul, the level of the soul of the person. This
Right.
is what I meant. And doesn't matter if it's able to act or cannot move because it has some disease, but all the reaction, what to do for the other person.
Right. I see
This is
what
what
I see what you're saying. What is the source of your acts? What is that most? We're speaking. Just let me define the
So
question.
mind.
Let me. Yeah. So you're saying brain, like not brain, but intellect, right? That's a good point. So let's say if you don't have intellect, you're not alive. I will get back to it in a second. Just for me to define my original question, we're speaking about a force. We're speaking about an energy. What is the most major force which resembles life? You're saying now mind, so intellect. Well, that's possible, but and it's almost true. But the question is, what is the source of the whole thing? Like, where is it when you say life? Something that it will be true even for the most simple creature. Instinct. So we're getting already there. What do you want to say?
Not like Hashem breast in the soul. Into the
We just said it when you weren't here, but that's
Yeah.
yeah, but that's not. We didn't accept.
Question, sorry. Just when I'm finished. I heard that there are 4 levels of the soul. Like this Ruach, Nefesh, Ruach,
5,
Neshama.
not 4.
5. And what? Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama. How is
Neshama chaya yechida.
Yes.
Nefesh, ruach, neshama chaya yechida.
But it's another topic, yes. No?
Yeah, it connects, but it's another. So, for example, if I take up what you said, in Chassidus it explains that these 5 levels go like this, from down to above. Nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida. The first 3, nefesh, ruach, neshama, they all mean in a way or another breathing. And Chassidus identifies these 3 levels in general. Nefesh is speech. Who said speech? You said speech. Ruach is emotions. Neshama is intellect. And now let's get back to my question. So what Chassidus says, the most basic resemblance of life is will. If you don't have will, you're not alive. So, which means you said instinct. We can say also consciousness. But because what is will? Will is your will. It's your that thing that moves you. So if we say that life is moving in the spiritual sense, that you're trying to get from the place you are to somewhere. What is life? Trying to overcome your boundaries. Right? You have a material boundary, and you're trying to move out of these boundaries, either in the physical sense or in the spiritual sense, right? As we explained. The most basic thing for that to happen is will. You have a small baby, or you have a bug. You have a bug on the table. What does it have? It probably, we don't know exactly, but it seems like it cannot speak. It doesn't have probably too much of complex emotions. It doesn't seem like it has a very complex intellect, but it has a will. It's moving somewhere towards something. Something is awakening his will. So, and this is why in in Hasidus, it says this idea of will is the most basic level of resemblance of life. And getting back to your point, Chaya Yechida, I'm not going to go into details, the top two levels of the soul are in general identified with this idea of will. Now, what does that have to do with us? When we speak about life, so Hasidus says, look at this is so interesting. So we say now will, where does will, or the soul, where does it dwell? Where is it in our body? So someone say, well, it's in my brain. Some would say, it's in my heart. And Hasidus does accept it. Hasidus does say that these are two major or most important organs of the body, most complex organs of the body. But Hasidus says, ultimately, what I see is that my will is in my whole body. It's not that, it's a very interesting way of picturing it. But Hasidus says, look at this. When you want something, you don't just want it with your brain. You want it with whatever organ it needs to be wanting it with. So for example, if I want, and this is so, I love the way it always brings it back. He says, look at when you wanna hold something, doesn't take time from your decision that I wanna hold it till my hand starts moving. There's no delay. It's not like there is my brain where the will is created, where the will comes in. I want to hold the cup, and I have to tell my hand, hey, you should hold the cup, and the hand then starts moving. No, the will goes right away through, which is not true with, for example, intellect and emotions. When I start thinking about something, do I like this house or not? That's an intellectual contemplation. And I'm like thinking, should I, is it good for me? Is it not good for me? Then I come to the conclusion that it is good for me. Then I start liking it. So there is a delay between intellect and emotions, but there's no delay between will and whatever level it is. And it's like, the nervous system. Just 1 second. The will comes through right away. And Hasidus says, why is this so? Because it's although true that some parts of the body have like a stronger revelation of the soul, for example, the brain, but that doesn't mean that the soul is just in the brain. The soul is in general in the whole body. It's all over the body. Equally there in the whole body. And this is where the expression comes that the soul encloses itself in the whole body fully, in every single organ and every ounce of the body. It's there. You wanted to ask something?
No, I was just thinking about that. It also depends about the others, about the atmosphere. Who is we? No, so it is not just you.
I don't understand what you're saying.
So no, it's another topic. Yes, I just wanted to say that it depends. Also about that what will you do your will. But yes, the will is your will. Yes, but it depends on. No, there's nothing. Sorry, so no.
Okay. You have to think about it a little bit more.
We're talking about the existence of
Yes.
That's the point here.
Yes.
Okay, so look at here when he elaborates this in the text. So, if the soul were to abide within his brain and heart alone, so we're on page 3 of section 2, and from there the will would be drawn down to the foot, and only then the foot would move, an interval would be necessary. There would be a delay there, so that there would be enough time for the will to be drawn down from the mind to the heart. We see, however, that the opposite is true. At the very same moment that the will is aroused, the foot moves. So this is a proof that it's all over. It's there everywhere. And so Hasidus in general says, and this is same is true for godliness. So godliness, which creates everything, in a similar, even inanimate things, obviously. It's there and it's dwelling and enclosing itself in every ounce of the existence. The same way our souls dwell in our bodies, right? And this actually, there is a quote from the Talmud in this about this. It says, "Shem shanashamim lubashes beguf." The same way that the soul includes itself in the body, so too godliness includes itself in the worlds, in the existence. So we know this, and the same way we know that there is a soul from just the fact seeing ourselves moving and being alive creatures. Nevertheless, now look at page 4, like the third sentence. Nevertheless, the nature of the enclosement cannot be comprehended. Certainly one does not comprehend the nature of the soul. So we see that this is the case. This is unquestionably so. But we cannot understand, number one, why is it so, how is it so? And we don't understand, even more so, what is the soul. So we not only don't understand what the soul is, we don't even understand how the soul includes itself in the body. And actually, this is just, again, it's a little bit off topic, but if we already spoke about the soul and the body and their relationship. So I mentioned that it's using this metaphor of enclosing itself, like the soul encloses itself into the body. It's like the body for the soul is similar to our shirts and pants that we put on for our body. And I said it uses this metaphor many times, but Hasidus always points out what the major differences are between the two ideas. And there's a beautiful explanation that Hasidus says, which I mentioned in one word, and I want to a little bit elaborate on it, is that what happens is that what type of unity is there between body and soul? What can I compare this unity to? So, for example, he says, let's look at a body and clothing, or it's better even to say a body and a tool, right? So let's first look at. Chassidus says, let's first look at an even simpler example. There's a cup inside water. There's a unity here, right? Because it's now a cup of water. Still, everybody understands that these two things are not mixed together. You can always define till where is the cup and where does the water start. Then there's a different type of unity. Hand and pen. My idea and the pen, right? What do? There's also unity here. My pen is used for me to express myself. So there's a unity between me and my pen. So this is a stronger unity than water and cup, a bit stronger, because when you speak about water and cup, there's both physical ideas that become united. Here we have some spiritual idea that unites itself in a way to express itself through the pen. But the pen does not connect or gets united with the idea that it writes in a way that it first of all identifies itself with it. So if you have a pen, you can write a terrible idea and a great idea with the same pen. So it's not like the pen identifies with what it's used for. And also, there's no interactive relationship here. So the idea is affecting the pen doesn't affect the idea. When you come to the unity of soul and body, the unity of soul and body is so strong that, number one, you cannot pinpoint any parts of you where you say, this is my body, just my body, and this is my soul. It's you with your soul, a live person. And this is issue number one. Issue number two is it's not a one-way street. So it's not that your soul affects your body, but also goes the other way around. Your body affects back your soul. There's a saying, one second. There's a saying in Yiddish, a klein lochele in guf is a groß lechele in the neshama. A small hole on the body is a huge hole in the soul. So what we see is that if a person has a problem with his body, that's going to affect his soul. If you're sick physically, that affects back your soul. And the same is true for the other way around. If you're sick mentally, it has also a physical resemblance. So body and soul are fully integrated, and this has a lot of implications. This means that Chassidus does not believe in the idea that souls just throw away their bodies, and the body has absolutely no relevance. This is the way why Chassidus explains why we honor the body. Why do we respect the body? Why do we respect the body even after the death? Why is there an importance of your gravesite and your burying place? Burial place. When your soul is not there anymore. What's the importance of the body? We see there is such a thing. You have to give such a respect to the body, and even more so. Why is it that there's this idea of tchias hamesim, of revival of the dead? Why? What's the importance of the body? Like, who cares about the body? Body is just it's just a clothes that you just throw away. Do you have if you were wearing a shirt for 10 years, then once you threw it away, that shirt has any part of you? It doesn't, because it never became so united with you. And that, what does Chassidus say? A body and a soul have such a strong connection that it's you when you have both of them. Once your soul leaves your body, first of all, the effect of your body stays on your soul. Your bodily life and its effects have an internal stain or internal effect on your soul. And your body is also not the same material than it was before it was a live creature. And it comes to your personality, the same is true. Your personality is not just your soul, it's also your body. So, for example, the way you are, the way your emotions are, the way your intellect is not only affected by your soul, it's also affected by your body. And this is why we get into even more mystical things. Chassidus and Kabbalah believes in reincarnation. There is this idea, there's this idea of reincarnation. But reincarnation, it doesn't mean, like in many Far East traditions, that, as far as I understand, I'm not an expert on Far East traditions, but as far as I understand, over there the idea is that you have a personality of someone, and that basically that same person comes out in another body. We don't take our personalities with us after we die, because our personality is our body and soul together. So it's not like, that is because of this extreme unity between body and soul that we are speaking about in the last 20 minutes. Yeah, you guys had something to say.
No, I mean, the first sentence you said, 3 minutes ago or so, this was so interesting. I just wanted you to repeat that, but how do we, this concept the body is the bones, it goes back to the Adamah, so the resurrection, is it not like, if there is such a new body? I don't quite get it.
How does resurrection happen if you have many bodies? That's your question?
No. When a person dies, so the soul goes back to the source,
right.
Which is God, let's say, So, is it not just an ethical question how we treat the bones? That I don't quite understand.
What is the significance of the body?
I don't believe in reincarnation, but it doesn't matter what I do believe or not. But in case the bones, the dust becomes dust. So why is it important, how the soul and the body, which is already decomposed, reunite in Olam Haba? I just can't...
Okay, I think there's a lot of thoughts in your question. I think yourself are trying to understand what you don't understand.
Yeah.
So that's normal, that's fine. So just a few things. Number one, there is actually there's an important discussion between the Rambam and the Ramban of Maimonides and Nachmanides, philosophical or I would say maybe a theological argument. What is the ultimate reward? What is the state of the ultimate reward? Is it the world to come of afterlife, or is it the world to come, the world of resurrection of the dead? And Chassidus accepts the idea that it's the resurrection of the dead. And this is a major theme, that it has to be the resurrection of the dead. But why? How come a physical existence is higher than a spiritual one? Like, what is the importance of the body and the physical existence when it's a limitation altogether? Right? We just said that the whole idea of the soul is trying to overcome these limitations. And then what's the importance? And isn't that more like a punishment to come back to the bodies? So Chassidus explains this on many levels. And this is also a very important theme of Chassidus, and we will probably speak about it next week, about the importance of physical world and the physical existence. We're not going to get into it now, but that's a very relevant question, which you just mentioned. So I'm just pointing out the question. Number two, there is a very interesting discourse from the Mittler Rebbe, the second Chabad Rebbe, who was Jewish before the Tzemach Tzedek, who speaks. The name of this book is Kuntras Istatchus. It's a discourse on visiting grave sites. So basically, it deals with the question: what is the importance of a gravesite? Why do we go? Why is there a Jewish custom to go visit grave sites and to visit especially grave sites of holy people? So, there's a Jewish custom to go to these grave sites and to leave little notes there, so what's the point? And it's a beautiful discourse that explains how ultimately the soul has such an effect on the body that some traces of this soul stay in the body even after the soul leaves the body. Actually, it is explained in length in Chassidus that the same way as for the soul to come into the body is a longer process, right? You get first, what's the word? Maktermina. How do you say that in English? Conceived is the word. So the woman gets conceived. I'm sorry, and then till the baby is born is a process, and then even when the baby is born, we see there's a process of consciousness that develops. The baby starts speaking. The baby starts thinking more complex, so on and so forth. Same way, dying is a process. Actually, the Talmud says, from the day you are born, you're starting to die. That's what it says. It's very cute. But once somebody dies and the soul leaves the body, it's a process. So therefore, also it is resembled in the customs of mourning. Why in the first 7 days, or before we bury the body, why is the most strict? Then the first 7 days, then the 30 days, then the year. Because there's a process the way the soul leaves the body. And the soul leaves its traces on the body, and therefore there's a relevance and a significance to your gravesite, to visit the gravesite, and there's a significance of respecting the body and not burning it, and so on and so forth. And then he says, when you speak about holy people, the effect of the soul on the body and the traces it leaves on the body are much stronger than on unholy people. And he says something very scoopy. And that's a tradition, which we'll get to the scoopy stuff in a second. It says that the fact that your body felbomlik, how you say this
Decomposing.
decomposes, it's because you're unholy. But if you were holy, and if you would let the soul, your holy soul, constantly overcome your physical limitations, then the body would able to overcome its physicality and not to decompose. And just let me finish.
Okay.
What?
If somebody ill, so I had a question, and sorry, if somebody is ill, and his body is also, and if maybe he doesn't treat his body like it's like the right way, it's a illness, it's the Yetzer Hara.
No, wait. No.
It's, and if somebody is
Okay, you're not. Just 1 second, because I don't want to get off track. Okay, so let's just get back to this idea of just 1 second. Okay, so we're saying that your body decomposes because you were not holy, and actually this connects to the idea of death itself. What do we read in the Bible? That we die because of the sin, right? If we were in our holy state, not only the body wouldn't decompose, but the bodies would live forever. Because for the soul to be in a body which is holy is not unbearable. But for the soul to be in the body which is materialistic and unholy is unbearable. And that's why death came upon humanity after the first sin. What happens to people that are righteous people that never sin? Why do they die? So it says in the Talmud, actually, there are people that, there's expression, they die because of the itoy shel nachash, because of the meirek, how you say, because of the poison of the snake. What does that mean, the poison of the snake? Because of this original sin. So they don't die because of their own sin. In theory, they shouldn't die because they don't have a sin. But they have to die because there's this generality, this collectiveness of sin, which happened with Adam. Once we correct this, then we will live forever again. This is the idea of resurrection. Now, what happens to people that were holy and they died? Their body doesn't decompose. And well, nobody ever checked that. But there is a historical encounter about one case that I know of. There was the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, who passed away in 1920. Tofresh. Yeah, 1920. He is buried in Rostov. Rostov is a town in Russia. And something like 12 years later, if I'm not mistaken, in 1932 or 1933, I have to check the exact date, but many years later, Stalinist Russia was in its all-time extreme. And just like in Bratislava, they wanted to, the way to suppress Jewish life, they also did some very ugly symbolic acts of the regime. So one of the things they did, just like in Bratislava, they said, okay, the train needs to go this way. It's going to go through the Jewish cemetery. So just wanted to get rid of the cemetery. You know, if ever you were in Bratislava, it's very unique. There is the train, and it goes above the gravesite of the Chassam Sofer, of Rabbi Schreiber, who was chief rabbi, and so they took away the whole cemetery. Just this, they were able to somehow save. So you have to go under the train tracks in order to go into the gravesite. But anyways, they did the same thing in Rostov. And they wanted it to go through it because the Rebbe was buried there, and they wanted to stop having this pilgrimage site of people coming to the gravesite. So there were 10 students of the Rebbe who made a very dangerous decision, a covenant, that they will go and take out the Rebbe's body from the gravesite and put it into another cemetery. And they did that. And
this is allowed, according to Halakha, this is allowed?
in this case, yes. So if that gravesite would be megszégyenítve, how you say, meggyalázva, how you say that? What? defiled, then that's the only time you're allowed to take out. But this obviously, if they would be caught, they would be sent either to death sentence or to forced labor in Siberia for many years. But they thought this is so important that it should be desecrated, the body, that they did it. And they meant middle of the night. And there is a book, a short book that came out in New York, something like probably 10, 15 years later, when many of the Chabad Hasidim were able to go out of Russia after Second World War. And somebody at the time made notes of what happened. He made like a little diary. And they printed this diary, and it's very interesting because he names the 10 people that were there, just besides 2 or 3 people. Why? Because these people were still in Russia, and he was afraid that a Hebrew book published in New York would cause them problems, because then the secret police would look at this book and they would then punish those people that were left behind. So there is this book, it's called Ishkafta the Rebbe. It's a short book, it's a diary of how the things happened. And it goes through the story, and he says, they went there in the middle of the night, it was raining and it was crazy, and miraculously they're able to get all the things that they needed, and they took out the body and they buried it somewhere else. And he says that we took out the Rebbe's body, the whole body was full, it was clean, it did not decompose. Just on the left foot there was some like blemish or something like that. It's pretty crazy, pretty scoopy. Actually, by the way, I was there when the Lubavitcher Rebbe was buried in 1994. I was I was there, and I didn't see it myself, but people, and he was buried right next to his father-in-law, who was the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe in New York. And they say that when they took out the earth, which he was buried there 50 years earlier, they said that obviously they didn't open up the what? The coffin, but they said that the coffin, and on the coffin there's a Hasidic custom to put the Rebbe's kaftan, the Rebbe's suit or long suit onto it. It was there as if it was buried yesterday. That's what they say. Anyways, so this idea of the body not being decomposed comes from the fact that when soul and body are united, and the soul is having such a strong effect on the body, and this effect being an internal effect, not just an external one, such a strong unity where body and soul connect in such a major way that they have an interactive relationship, then the traces of the Holy Soul stay on the body even after the soul leaves the body. So why were we speaking about this? One second. Why are we speaking about this? Because we are speaking about the importance of how you all understand that you have a soul, and it doesn't mean you understand what that soul is. You don't even understand how that soul encloses itself in the body. But you understand that you have a soul, so that you have the knowledge of existence, but you don't have the understanding of essence. Yes, somebody want to say something? Or we can go on. Okay, so let's go on. Look, and this is what is meant by the expression in page 4. This is what's meant by the expression, the knowledge of the soul's existence, but not the comprehension of its nature. Similar concepts apply with regard to God. His existence is known, for we know that there is a creator, the source of life, who gives life to the world and brings it into a being. The nature of his being, in contrast, is not known. And concerning this is what it said, no thought can grasp him, which we wrote on the blackboard behind me. So when the Zohar says, no thought can grasp him, grasping means understanding its essence, not just knowing his existence. Comprehending the actual nature of his being. And this is what it says, we mentioned this yesterday about which was said about that there was a discussion between Moses and God, and Moses said, I want to see your face. And what did God answer him? My face shall not be seen. So my essence is not something that you could understand or comprehend. Now, in general, the idea of knowledge refers to knowledge of the existence of an entity. But in regard to comprehension, we use the term sight. Knowing something usually means knowing of something. Comprehension is more like seeing. When you see something, you could see it with your physical eyes, and you could see it be'einei haseichel, with the eyes of your brains. So you can, when you understand, when you say, somebody's explaining you an idea and you say, oh, okay, I see. What do you mean by I see? Now it's clear to me almost as much as I would see it physically. And therefore, for the power of sight is the medium to grasp the nature of an entity that is perceived. Right? Many times I know something exists, but I don't know how it exists. But once I see it, I also know how it exists. In which way does it exist, right? Okay. So, okay, I think we're going to have a little break now. Yeah, question.
Like when there was not just a long time ago, I mean maybe 1 month or so, even less, the yard site for Chatham Sofer and the buildings are coming from all over.
Right.
This is like Chatham Sofer is like a mediator
between God and the people.
Communicate is his soul, or this is,
Yeah. So,
or is he like a mediator to,
right.
like Catholics have like, because I have a little problem with this, like how to understand this.
Right, I'll explain you.
There is also a folk custom when you visit the
Graveside?
You just should not turn back. Sometimes they also left, and you throw the grass and you throw it behind, because the spirit can follow it, etc. This is the whole.
Right. So actually, to answer your question, first of all, there are many topics in regards of burial and mourning and visiting the graveside. They are very mystical. This is one of the most mystical parts of Jewish practice. And there are so many customs that don't have a clear, not necessarily have a clear explanation. And it's not just Hasidic customs. So doesn't only have to do with Hasidism. The idea of to go to a gravesite and to pray there and to leave a kvittel, as we say in Yiddish, or a pan, as we say in Chabad circles, which is a little note with some wish, that's more of a Hasidic custom, which actually the Chatham Sofer was not Hasidic at all. But today you still see people going to his gravesite and leaving little notes there, which I'm not sure if he would have thought that when he was alive that would happen. But this is one of the things which I mentioned yesterday, that Hasidic practice and Hasidic ideas really got accepted and become mainstream in many ways, in generally in Orthodox Judaism. But what is the idea of this praying by the graveside? Like, who are you praying to? Are you praying to God? Are you praying to this saint that you go to? So in this discourse that I mentioned to you, the discourse of Ishtadchus, the discourse of graveside visiting of the second Lubavitcher Rebbe, he explains it in a beautiful way. He says, actually, it's similar to going to the Holy Land, right? So we all go to the Holy Land, and we go to, for example, the site of the Beis Hamikdash, the site of the Holy Temple. Like, why do we do that? What's the point? If God is all over, why do we need to go to a designated place in order to pray to Him there? And that question is even in Morsha. Why is it saying halacha that a place of prayer, of worship, is is more designated or more perceivable for prayer than just your home. It says even that even if you don't have a minyan, if you don't have 10 people praying, you should try to go to the synagogue to pray because it's a better place. So as if a physical place has a relevance in holiness. Why would that be? Why would that be so if God is all over? So here it's actually very nice because we can come back to, and let's ask the major question. Why do we see that there is relevance to physical coordinates, that's how you say, physical environment, surroundings, is the idea of the temple itself. Because it's in the Bible that you should build a temple, and that temple is somehow more holy, and that's a holier environment. And there's levels of holiness. Like in the Talmud, it really goes into details of, for example, the temple in Jerusalem, which parts can regular Jews enter, which parts can non-Jews enter, which parts can Levites enter, which parts can Kohanim enter, which parts can only the holy priest enter. And it's all based on level of holiness. These different areas of the temple were even marked generally by their height, how high they were. So there were different steps that went. So it's all there. Why is there a relevance to this? What's the importance of this when God is all over? So he says like this. Let's go back to our metaphor with body and soul. We just explained before that soul is all over the body. Because soul is resembled ultimately by will, the will is not just in one place, it's all over, right? We just said that. Still, can you say that my little pinky, is the word pinky? Pinky, yeah, of my left foot has the same importance in relevance to my soul's dwelling in my body as my brain? Not really, because if you cut off, chas v'shalom, you cut off your pinky, you will be still living a pretty complete life. If they cut off your head, it's not going to be a happy life after that. So it means that there is some relevance that although we say that the body fully integrates into the whole, and the soul fully integrates into the whole body, it doesn't mean that there is no one place where ikar mishkan, where is its main place of dwelling. And it says the same thing is true for creation. God is there in the whole of creation. And you cannot say it's here more or there less. But there is still certain places where that holiness of that godliness is more felt and more there. And this is the reason why, for example, Israel is a holier place than other places. And Jerusalem is holier, and the place of the temple is even more holier. It's like Jerusalem is like the brain of the world. If the world is the body, then Jerusalem is the brain of the world. And now, what does this have to do with righteous people? Righteous people, it says that the gravesite of righteous people is like a little embassy for Israel. Like it's a holy, the gravesite itself is just as holy as the Holy Land. Why? Because they and their bodies let the godliness that was dwelling in them to be revealed in a much stronger way than other people, and therefore their environment, even after their death, their body, with the traces of their soul on their body, has this special holy environment. So obviously when you go there, you don't pray to the righteous person, just like when you go to a righteous person when he's alive. But his surrounding and his environment is a holy environment. And therefore your prayer has an easier way to go through than when it's not in a holy environment.
So,
I just wanted to
Just
ask
one second, he wanted... Yeah, I'm sorry?
I just wanted to ask this in the first, but I couldn't finish.
no,
Because it was the topic. I just wanted to say that if there is respiration, what happens with the body? I just wanted to ask if somebody is in the chair, how to say.
So it says that all people will be healed. So after the bodies, wake up, all the bodies will be complete. So all the blemishes or sicknesses or problems that there were.
Yes, and I just wanted to ask if somebody have is whole ill, then
he will be healed.
It's because of the Yetzer Hara, if he treats his body like this, or it's an illness, or what is the Hasidic philosophy about this?
About illness. Okay, I will answer in a second. Did you want to also ask a question? Kira, you wanted to ask something?
No, I mean, I do understand, considering temple, because it says in Tanakh, like, Shekhinah is dwelling on the left side. I mean, I do understand this, but...
Where is the source of the grave sites?
Yeah, I mean...
Well, we do see in the Bible that there is an importance to grave sites. We see it by Abraham. We see it him burying Sarah and the importance of where Yaakov felt that he should be buried. So we do see that there is an importance of gravesite. Now, getting to your question, just before I go for a little break, because I didn't have the break yet. So about illnesses. So Hasidus says that when a person is ill, that could have a physical source and that could have a spiritual source as well. So if you're ill, it could be that it's just something wrong with your body. So for example, Hasidus says, when there are some disabilities, so somebody cannot speak, for example, is it a problem of the soul or problem of the body? So Hasidus says, most it can be two things. First of all people by nature of their soul have the capability to speak. So there's no soul that doesn't have the capability to speak. Per definition. If you don't speak, if you cannot speak, it could be either one of two things. Either somehow the tool of speech, your mouth, is something wrong with it. It's like there's the tool itself is somehow incorrect, or the way your soul encloses itself in the body, the connection between soul and body somehow doesn't work. And we actually see that by, for example, disabled people. There is I don't fully understand in this, but the way I understand is that disabled people, there are disabilities that you cannot correct. So if you don't know how to, if you can't walk because something wrong with your foot, and you cannot correct it, and sometimes somehow your nerve system is not good, so the commands that your brain sends to your feet somehow don't go through. And this is something you could try to correct and try to teach these people to walk. And so this is similarly what Chassidus says. So it's and about illnesses. So for example, if you have a mental illness, if you have a physical illness, before we get to mental illnesses, physical illness can either be a source of it from the soul, spiritual source, or it can have a physical source. Right? It's simple, but it's always an interaction. So if you have, even if the source of it is not spiritual, it will have an effect on your mental state and your spiritual state. When there's a mental illness, that's really on the edge of these two things, because it's very hard. It's a really strong example of this interaction between body and soul. You have a mental illness, very hard to define what is the source of the mental illness. Is it some type of chemical problem, chemistry problem, or is it some type of environmental or spiritual problem? And usually it's not one or the other. It's usually some type of mixture of the two. So that's why, for example, if somebody has a mental problem, you cannot just can't only heal it with medicine. It's better if you also have some type of spiritual, or I don't mean spiritual, but mental treatment. But you also many times cannot just heal it with mental treatment. So you need both, because it's like really on the edge of the body and soul issue, much more than if you have a physical illness. But in general, by the way, it says in Chassidus that most of the time, the illnesses start with some spiritual problem. So you become vulnerable once you have a spiritual problem, and that will have an effect on your physicality sooner or later.
But you don't agree that you can punish somebody because of the sins that they cut his leg?
What?
It's not about souls, absolutely.